Happy Canada Day! Hi, I'm Don from DonDronesOn. On June 23rd, Transport Canada unveiled the details of their proposed RPAS regulation update, with rationale and background, details of the proposal, and a timeline towards implementation. They want drone community feedback, so let's learn all about what they're proposing and get back to them on what we like and don't like. Let me help you by introducing you to the material and some highlights. But first, enjoy this wee bit of wee roll from Dave Stredolinski of Nova Scotia, with more footage at the end. First of all, the timeline. They made the proposal public on June 23rd. There's a link in the description below the video. They've announced a 90-day consultation period that closes on September 22nd, 2023. That's the deadline to provide feedback. After that, the timeline is a little bit open-ended, but I expect there to be a final announcement of the regulations late in 2024 via the Canada Gazette 2, hopefully reflecting our feedback. Implementation is expected to be phased, with some items coming into effect immediately. They've said some parts of the proposal will not come into effect until April of 2025. So what are they proposing anyway? Well, a lot, frankly. It breaks down into 7 chunks, and I'll start with the good news first. 2 very specific additional allowances for existing and new advanced pilots called extended Vloss and sheltered operations. More on this later. This is actually pretty good. Number 2, the allowance to register and fly RPAs over 25 kilograms up to 150 kilograms, a class they're now calling medium RPAs, without an SFOC. This will be good news for some large RC aircraft pilots, although it will still be far from easy. Number 3, a huge set of rules for routine BVLOS flights, again without an SFOC, but frankly designed for the heavy-duty cargo drone and infrastructure inspection folks primarily. A lot of overhead for the average Joe to take on, and I'll give you guys an outline of what this is about. But since I'm focused mainly on the recreational and small commercial drone community, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this chunk. I'm not saying it's not important. In fact, it's immensely important for the so-called drone industry. But if that's your game, you'll have to read the material yourself. The 4th chunk, a number of new rules clarifying Canadian ownership requirements for what they call commercial air services. Number 5, this chunk is a fairly large number of, well, what I would call tweaks to the existing regulations. For the most part, these are simply word changes to allow for larger drones and BVLOS operations, but they have made a few subtle changes to some of the rules, mostly neutral or slightly positive. Unfortunately, they've also missed the opportunity to fix some obvious problem rules, so I'm rather disappointed here. Then we get into the nasty bits. Registration fees. Yep, they're going up. And then the worst part, huge new fees for SFOCs for both low and high complexity applications. So yeah, this upgrade covers a lot of ground. Let's try to get through each piece, starting with the best one. Current and new advanced RPAS pilots will now be able to perform 2 new kinds of operations that used to require an SFOC, or, well, breaking the law. The trickier operation is called extended Vloss, and it's similar to something I've pushed for in the past, but not quite as good. Under extended Vloss, advanced pilots will be able to fly their drone up to 3.7 kilometers, 2 nautical miles, away from them, as long as they have a spotter who can see the airspace where the drone is flying. They don't have to see the actual drone, just the airspace, such that they can detect potential conflicts and let the pilot know. Now there's 2 catches. The spotter must have at least their advanced pilot certificate themselves. And you have to keep the drone at least 30 meters away from bystanders. I really like this new allowance, frankly. Well, other than the qualifications required for the spotter. I mean, do you really need an advanced certificate to have a pair of eyes and the ability to yell, "Plane"? The second new kind of operation available to any advanced pilot is called a sheltered operation. This move allows you to fly around a building or structure out of visual line of sight as long as you stay close to the building, within 61 meters horizontally and not more than 30 meters above the building or structure. Again, you have to stay 30 meters away from bystanders. Strangely, they've limited this to buildings and structures. It doesn't apply to flying behind trees, hills, or other obstructions. And I know what you're thinking. Big deal. Who hasn't done this kind of thing from time to time and done it completely safely? Well, the thing is, it will now be legal. And pretty important to folks doing real estate shots, for example. These new kinds of operations are described in proposed rules 901.74 and 901.75. The next big news is the allowance for regular advanced pilots to fly RPAs over 25 kilograms up to 150 kilograms, now dubbed medium RPAs. Now, I know this will excite some RC aircraft folks with huge models, but before you crack open the champagne, and of course then wait 48 hours, this new allowance comes with a number of strings attached. The key limitations are that the aircraft must meet new safety assurance declaration requirements. The advanced pilot must keep the plane within visual line of sight. You have to stay under 122 meters AGL, and you need to stay 152 meters away from bystanders. That's a lot farther than regular. So while some recreational folks may be able to benefit from this new allowance, I think it's mainly intended to make it much easier for commercial operators to test and qualify large drones, say for cargo or pipeline inspections or whatever. Right now, without this opening, Canadian drone manufacturers need to jump through flaming hoops and secure tricky SFOCs to even attempt a flight test on their own grounds. Now they'll be able to do it easily. And that's a good segue to the biggest, at least by volume of words, new regulations in this release. A set of rules, new standards, a new pilot certificate level, and other festive trimmings to allow routine flights beyond visual line of sight without an SFOC. And honestly, this is a big deal. Canada will be among a small number of countries where Vloss regulations will now be on the table. It will no longer be an exception or an exemption or any other such oddity. Vloss will be a regulated kind of normal operation, at least for big companies. Now, for some reason, TC thinks these Vloss rules will solve the issue of FPV flight and FPV racing. This is totally nuts. The way this is constructed, it is absolutely not for you or me as a recreational or small commercial drone pilot. You'll go insane reading the rules or die of old age first. Okay, maybe a bit of an exaggeration, but let me list off some of the requirements, and soon you'll be begging me to stop. You'll need the new Level 1 Complex Pilot Certificate, which in turn will require a mandatory ground school session, expected to cost an average of $660, a new even tougher exam with a proposed per attempt fee of $50, another flight review, which is expected to be provided, but only about 10% of the current regular flight reviewers, and a certified medical checkup every 5 years. In addition, any individual or organization flying Vloss operations will need to qualify for the new RPAS Operator Certificate, which requires extensive written operating procedures, safety protocols, maintenance processes, and an accountable executive, a maintenance person, and a documented training program. Shall I stop? Yeah, this is fine for big companies, but not for you or me. If you're going after this level of operation and watching my YouTube channel, well, first of all, thank you, but please don't expect me to come out with Don's handy binder for RPAS operators. It's not going to happen. The next important chunk of new stuff in the regulations is around commercial air services. I mention it because it sounds important, but I really don't understand all the rationale, impact, or subtleties around what they call a clarification of Canadian ownership requirements for commercial air services. Apparently, this is in line with similar rules for traditional aviation. I think what they're saying is that if you intend to offer any kind of commercial drone service in Canada, even simple aerial photography for money, you must be a Canadian or permanent resident, part of a Canadian government organization, or be a Canadian-controlled corporation. It does not impact foreign recreational pilots, although they still need to get an SFOC, which is frankly insane. Chunk number 5, tweaks to existing rules. I was hopeful when I saw all of these because I had provided quite a bit of feedback on rules that were dumb or some that needed to be reworded for clarity. But no, most of the changes are simply to work in the wording for the new medium drone class or the Vloss stuff. Here are some of the other things they've changed. They've tacked in an amendment to allow for annual fee increases matching the consumer price index. Yay. They've removed references from 901.14 to not being allowed to fly in Class F restricted airspace. But then they put that restriction back into the main aviation regulations in Section 601.04 of the CARS. Why are they burying this? This makes no sense to me. On the other hand, here's a sensible change. They've replaced the don't carry any living creatures on board rule, 901.22, with a rule that says you can't carry people on board unless you have an SFOC. So your hamster will soon be able to fly. Okay, I'm just kidding. They've added a new procedural requirement to 901.23. They want us to have a written procedure for the detection and avoidance of conflicting air traffic and other hazards. And there's a new standard, 923, vision-based detection and avoidance, to support this. They've cleaned up the wording of the site survey rule, 901.27. Nothing earth-shattering, but certainly more clear now. They've added a couple of bits to the serviceability rule, 901.29. At first it sounds benign, but listen to this part. All equipment required by these regulations, blah, 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 is installed, if applicable, and serviceable. Call me paranoid, but doesn't that smell like a preemptive move to stop people from disabling remote ID modules if TC decides to add remote ID to the regulations? Certainly sounds like that to me. And by the way, there is absolutely nothing about remote ID in these new regulations, so don't get worried about that. Not yet. Advertised events, Rule 901.41. Police and such will be exempt from the requirement for an SFOC at advertised events. Terrific. Just what we need. More police drones over crowds. What could possibly go wrong? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm absolutely in support of exempting first providers from restrictions in cases of legitimate urgency, firefighting, search and rescue, and that kind of thing. But a blanket exemption for advertised events just seems like a bad idea. Oh, and here's a baffler. Rule 901.43 lists off nasty stuff you can't carry as a payload. Fair enough. But for some unknown reason, they've taken explosive, corrosive, flammable, or biohazard material off the list, implying that we are now allowed to carry this stuff. I don't understand. I suspect this is a mistake. That said, they've added a new rule, 901.50, simply stating that you will no longer be allowed to drop an object from a drone. Good. With a simple stroke of a pen, they've solved the prison contraband problem. Finally. But seriously, what about real use cases like dropping emergency supplies or even agricultural fertilizer applications? Did they think about those? Okay, so really nothing absolutely outrageous has been added with these tweaks. But what is frankly appalling are the things they haven't changed. Two specific ones that jump out at me are 901.35 that states you can't have a single snowflake on your drone, just dumb, and 901.25, the basic maximum altitude rule. Well, specifically the part about flying near tall structures. It's worded wrong and should be corrected in this release. But at the risk of launching into a rant, wouldn't this have been the opportunity to do a rather massive cleanup of all the overly prescriptive rules that were just cut and pasted from manned aviation? The mandatory list of detailed pre-flight checks, written procedures, site surveys, weather conditions, icing, the need to carry your instruction manual around with you, maintenance records, all this absolute and utter crap. Shouldn't they have taken this opportunity to throw it all out and simplify it down to a few basic rules, such as check that your RPA is in good condition and your flight area is safe and legal? Leave the rest of the details as recommendations or best practices, at least for small RPAs, and maybe move these prescriptive items such that they apply legally only to medium drones and Vloss flights where the risks are higher. Okay, end of rant. Oh wait, just a bit more. I've got to mention a couple of absolutely hilarious statements in the 50 pages of preamble. How about this one? Did you know that TC thinks that 57% of advanced exams are taken for the purpose of recency? Really? I'd be surprised if anyone ever did that. It's ridiculous. Or the time estimate to register a drone. 30 seconds. That's amazing. Come on, it takes more than that just to log into the portal or to find a magnifying glass to read the damn serial number off your drone. Okay, let's move on. Now we get to the truly nasty bits of the new proposal, fees. The first fee change affects every one of us. They are proposing that the registration fee be doubled from $5 per aircraft to $10, with no maximum or fleet rate. Not a big deal for those of us with a couple of drones, but for the RC aircraft community and FPV folks who tend to have pretty large fleets, this could start getting expensive. Of course, the fee only applies to RPAs over 250 grams. But here's the part that really chaps my ass. This whole proposal has about 50 pages of jibber-jabber about justifications and cost-benefit analysis for all of these changes. But one key line stands out about fees, the so-called user pays principle. Those who benefit from program services pay an appropriate share of the costs for those services. And they include drone registration as a government service that somehow drone owners benefit from. No, it's not. There is absolutely no benefit to me to register my drone. It's 100% intended to allow TC to count the drones and link them to a person for enforcement purposes. So it's only for the benefit of the public, not the drone owner. Now, I'm sure someone will pipe up and say it helps if you lose your drone, they can trace it. But no, I can and do put my phone number on my drone for that purpose. So justifying doubling the fee by the user pay argument is nonsense. This is just a money grab, plain and simple. But wait, there's more. SFOCs. Currently, applying for an SFOC is free. In the proposal, TC is saying there will be a fee of $150 for low complexity SFOCs and $2,000 for high complexity SFOCs. Now, just as an aside, these are exactly the same fees suggested back in 2021 during the original consultation phase. Here's TC's response to our feedback. TC took the feedback into consideration, but after reviewing the submissions and further analysis, determined that the proposed fees strike an effective balance between private and public benefit and would not have a disproportionate impact on the sector. In short, we were completely ignored. So what is low versus high complexity? Low complexity is flying at an advertised event or an application from a foreign recreational pilot. $150 per application now, whether it is approved or not. And again, as an aside, why have they not fixed this foreign pilot thing? What's wrong with having foreign pilots simply pass our exams like everyone else? And surely with all these fancy meetings with international aviation authorities, they could have ironed out some reasonable pilot certificate equivalencies. At least for US visitors. I mean, this is now absolutely embarrassing that someone with their Part 107 from the FAA must still grovel on bended knee for permission to fly in Canada, and now pay $150 for the privilege. Get real. High complexity SFOCs are $2,000 per crack. Flying a drone over 150 kilograms, fair enough. Foreign commercial drone operations, Vloss operations other than the new lower risk ones, flying over 122 meters, operating more than 5 drones at a time, carrying nasty payloads, well, aside from the now permitted explosive stuff, I guess, carrying people on board, and flying outside Canadian airspace. Oh, and here's a weird argument put forth in the preamble. They claim that one of the big motivations for the various Vloss allowances was to reduce the number of SFOCs, allowing them to focus on higher complexity applications. In the preamble, they claim that they expect the Vloss stuff to reduce the number of SFOC applications by over 50%. But for some reason they exclude foreign applications from that math. Let's have a look at the SFOC numbers TC published in May. Oh, Vloss stuff is actually a small bit of the workload. If they really wanted to free up resources, they should fix this foreign operator load, simplify the advertised event story, and shift the authorization for high-altitude flights and flying near DND sites to NAV Canada, like every other airspace authorization. Why is TC acting as the middleman in these two cases? That would clear up the SFOC inbox big time. Learn about Mr. Pareto and his fine work. Before I wrap up, I really should mention some positive things about this massive set of proposals. There's no change for drones under 250 grams. They've left the rules there simple and non-prescriptive. Just don't do anything stupid. Fees for the basic and advanced exams have not changed. That's good too. And there is nothing about remote ID in these regulations. And finally, a subtle but hugely important point. Back in 2021, when they did the early consultations on these proposals, they listed out the stakeholders. And here they are: public safety organizations, training providers, manufacturer and service providers, and non-recreational RPAS operators. Recreational drone pilots weren't even considered worth talking to. This has now changed big time. Recreational operators are explicitly acknowledged as a large segment of RPAS users, and every part of the preamble has a separate section devoted to recreational pilots, whether that be discussing use cases, impact, cost, or benefits. That is a massive turnaround in recognition from 2 years ago. Now, these recreational sections may contain utter BS, like claiming $12 million of benefits to recreational pilots, but at least we're being recognized. All right, that's it. TC wants feedback on their proposal. The way you do that is directly online. There's a link in the description below. At the end of each section of the document, there's an Add a Comment button, which opens to allow up to 20,000 characters of your loving words. But be sure to also hit the Review and Submit Your Comments buttons at the bottom of the document. You can post comments anonymously, by the way, but I encourage you to sign your name. You can also simply email your feedback to the RPAS team, and again, the email address is in the description. And even though we have until September 22nd, 2023 to submit comments, please don't wait till the last minute. Have a read through the material and submit your comments now while they're fresh in your mind. That's it. That's all. I'm tired of talking, and I'm sure you're tired of listening to me. But thanks if you did. Catch you next time. And oh wait, don't forget to watch Dave's great Wii roll. Bye for now.